Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where frontline sales leaders teach you how to build and scale an outbound sales team. Welcome back to the Predictable Revenue Podcast. I'm your host, Collin Stewart. Today, I'm joined by Sean O'Shaughnessy. He's the CRO over at Agile Stacks and author of the book, Eliminate Your Competition. Sean, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, great having you on. I don't know if you can hear the difference, or you can certainly see the difference, but because we are now in self-quarantine and everybody in the office is working from home, I am dialing in from my bedroom and really hoping the kids on the other side of this wall don't wake up and start screaming. If they do, they might come and join the podcast. So hopefully nap time lasts for another 45 hour and a half would be great, but no promises, no guarantees.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing what we're having to go through as an economy right now, right?
It's interesting. I'm super grateful that we had set the company up to work remotely from day one. Even though we had offices, everybody was laptops, and there's no paper. I fought for us to never buy a printer so that people didn't get tied to paper. And our accounting team finally snuck one in. They just went out and bought it, which is something I would do. So I got to respect that. But I'm very fortunate that we've been able to make the transition from living in offices to fully remote. And I'm hoping everybody that's listening is doing the same, and they're safe and healthy and happy with the transition, even if it is temporary to remote.
I agree.
So talking about the episode today, Sean, you're a big fan, or not a big fan, of the old HunterFarmer model. You actually wrote a book about the trapper model. And the book is called Eliminate Your Competition, but we're not going to go into the book here. I'm curious, what's your beef with the old hunter and farmer model?
So the traditional hunter-farmer model is just a little bit too simplistic, right? So, and that's kind of my big beef with it, is it's just too simplistic in a relatively complicated world. Now, I'm going to be kind of forthright. I have always sold to and been involved in B2B sales, selling products that are fairly complicated to sell, right? So long decision times, lots of people involved in the decision-making process. It's not unusual for me to go 6 months. I've had some deals take me 2 years to actually close, right? So, the farmer model or the hunter model is just too simplistic. And I've seen salespeople that say that, well, they usually don't say that they're farmers, right? Because that's kind of a negative connotation in life. But they'll say that they're hunters. And I also see them just losing deals because of their hunter mentality. And so over the years, I said, there's got to be a better way. And that's what I actually came up with. And I actually break it down into 4 different categories. I actually say that we still have hunters and farmers. And actually, there's good reasons for that. But we also have things called gatherers, and we have trappers. So a lot of the things I talk about in my book, and when I explain this concept, I fall back on the 1700s, 1800s kind of theory on what does a trapper look like, what does a hunter look like, what does a farmer look like, all that kind of stuff, right? So I use those as my examples a lot of times when I talk about it, but it's just too simplistic to say there's only hunters and there's only farmers, because there's bad things that hunters do and there's bad things that farmers do. On the flip side, there's good things that they do as well.
So talk to me about, I understand the idea of a trapper from how we evolve and like how it's different from hunter and farmer. I'm thinking you're getting into some, like, is this person using NLP to like trap them into like agreeing to sales, or help me understand what you're thinking of here, because I doubt it's as nefarious as what's going on up here.
So let's use those examples from pioneer days, right? Because everybody's a little familiar with it. You've watched Daniel Boone or whatever on TV, right? So let's use those examples a little bit, right? So let's start with something that everybody knows about, and that is, what is a farmer? So a farmer, typically, they have their farm. They have their 40 acres or 80 acres, whatever, right? They have their thing that they're working on, and they are going to put a lot of work into that. They're going to keep going to it over and over and over again. They're going to cultivate it. They're going to put good seed there. And those are all good qualities, right? I mean, let's be honest, those are all good qualities. However, you get a bad rainstorm, you get a bad hailstorm, you get a drought, and all of a sudden the farmer is now starving, right? So, but that doesn't mean that a farmer doesn't close deals. I know people that I would categorize as a farmer, and they close deals. So that's the downside of saying the farmers are bad, is because they do close a significant amount of deals sometimes, but they also tend to have ups and down years where the things aren't going well. Their patch is not doing as well that year, right? So that's the problem with a farmer. For a hunter kind of sees and shoots, right? I mean, that's really what the hunter is doing, walking around the woods in the traditional hunter mythology, but you walk around the woods and he sees an animal, he sees a prey, and he shoots, right? Or she shoots. That's wonderful, right? You saw something, you were able to get it, you were able to win the deal, and you close it. That's fantastic. Those are good traits. However, just like with a farmer, there's some bad things about that too. What if you don't see anything? What if you can't find a prey to actually go after, right? So that's the problem with the hunter. The hunter always has to trip over what he's going to catch. And that's a problem, because if you can't do it, then you aren't going to be successful. So in mythology times or in pioneer days, you roam wide and far looking for game. You know, we heard about our Native Americans back in the day, and they would follow the bison herds across the plains, and they'd travel long distances, and they'd have houses that were very portable so that they could follow these animals around. You know, that's what they had to do, and that worked really well. But it also didn't work that well as well. And that's the problem with it just being a very simplistic, I'm just going to be a trapper, or I'm just going to be a hunter. So if I look at what are the good things about gatherers as well, and let's make them better, about farmers, let's turn them into gatherers. Now let's think about what a gatherer is. Gatherer is somebody that there's berries or roots or whatever, they went out and they kept on gathering. They have to really know they're in the area to do that. I categorize gatherers in the sales model as being people that have really good relationships with high quality companies, and they work for a high quality company, right? So they are in the account every day or every other day, 3 times a week. They are constantly trying to grow the business at that account. That's not a hunter. You would think that'd be a great thing, but that's not a hunter. But it's also a very important thing. And there's whole companies that are set up their entire methodology to make gatherers be successful, so that they become trusted advisors. And being a trusted advisor is a great thing. A hunter that runs around and is only trying to look for the next deal rarely turns into a trusted advisor. And we all hear that trusted advisors are a good thing. And we need to, our salespeople need to be trusted advisors. So if you take all of the good things for all of those, we turn that into a trapper. And let's think about what a trapper does. So a trapper does look for game. And he's always moving around. He's always looking for prey, but he's also understanding what kind of prey to catch. He's not just shooting anything that moves. He's only shooting the kind of things that he can sell, right? So and he's also understanding, where do I put my traps? How do I relate my traps? And a lot of this, of course, came from the standard sales methodology of setting traps to get out of deals or to win deals or not lose deals. So I developed that terminology because of that, because we simply have this very, very complicated sales process, very, very long. You have to know exactly what you're doing in order to be successful. And you have to think ahead about my prey, and I'm not saying the customer is a prey, but my prey is going to walk down this path to get to this water hole, and I need to put a trap there to get that, right? Or in the case of, if I'm beating my competition is going to go down this hole, go down this path, and I got to trip him up. I got to set a trap here so that my competition does not proceed farther. So I use those methodologies to think of, how do I make this better? Because that hunter and farmer, just too simplistic. I actually have a little chart that I can show you if you'd like to see it.
That's it.
And you'll see that if we look at this, and this is a traditional 4-quadrant chart, right, that you would see in any personality test or whatever. And I'm a firm believer that nobody is actually purely a hunter, purely a farmer, purely a gatherer, purely a trapper. But if we look at it, they are the different instances or the different capabilities are actually growing from each other. For a farmer can easily become a gatherer if that relationship is stronger and stronger and they become a trusted advisor. A hunter can actually, if they start to become a trusted advisor and they start thinking ahead and planning ahead, they become a trapper. and a gatherer obviously can move over to become a trapper as well. The strongest salespeople, in my opinion, are trappers that are in a gatherer position. It's almost impossible to be a gatherer in a existing account. Let me give you an example of that. So in the example of, I have a salesperson selling for a high quality company, not a fly by night company, but a company that's got decades of experience, that have lots of products that are great products, dominant in their industry. And that person's job is to maximize the revenue coming from this large company, a Fortune 500, probably a Fortune 50 company. And we know these people, right? They're not even uncommonly, they might even be a vice president level salesperson, right? That is assigned to one account. That person is becoming totally entrenched, talking to the CEO, talking to the board potentially, talking to various vice presidents in the organization. Now you've got another deal that you want to stick in, you want to compete with that person, good luck. That's going to be the hardest deal that you're ever going to do. You almost can never be a great gatherer in a deal, right? So we need to think larger than just farmer and hunter, because too many people that are farmers and hunters constantly lose to gatherers. In fact, they avoid them, right? They'll say, well, that account, you know, they're sold on whatever company. I don't want to name companies here, but you know, if it's not painted blue or it's not painted purple or not painted red, that company doesn't buy that product because of that sales team that's on that account. Well, that's a significant benefit to that company that's selling that, and we all need to get that good, and we need to get that good selling to most of our customers.
Gotcha. So that was a lot of hunter, gatherer, farmer, trapper. And let me just see if I can kind of place this into how into the roles that I see in the world here. If you just go back to that graph, so I can see here. It feels like the farmer are really more of like the account manager type individuals, where they're not really focused on, they're more focused on servicing the account, and, you know, dealing with upsells, dealing with like contract extensions, almost like a customer success role.
Almost, yes.
And then
yes.
The gatherer seems like it seems like two different archetypes here, right? Or like two different sides of the same archetype, where there's like the light side and the dark side.
Exactly.
And on the light side, it's the gatherer, which is that sort of, it's all of the benefits of being a farmer, but you're just ratcheting it up. So you're being more proactive about getting into your accounts, whereas the farmer seems a little bit less proactive.
And that's a key word on both sides, and that is being proactive, right? So even on the hunter trapper side, it is that proactivity capability, that ability to think ahead and to figure out, what do I have to do for my customer for long term or even short term, but what am I going to have to do and how am I going to position myself, as opposed to, I am going to, for a farmer, I'm just going to pick up things off the field. I'm just going to take deals as they come to me. That's great if you can get that way, but if you can be a gatherer and you're actually going out there looking for stuff and making things happen, it becomes a little bit better.
Gotcha. And so if I look at the difference between hunter and trapper, when you were describing hunter, this really sounded like you're sort of lone wolf sales rep that's solely focused on closing the deal and not associated with any follow through.
Or not, actually, it's more in the decision process of the deal itself. And I have some charts that I can show as we talk about this, but in a typical decision-making process, and remember, my world is long sales cycles, right? So in the typical decision-making process, the customer, you're never going to make the pitch and the customer goes, oh, I got to buy that, right? Mm-hmm. That just doesn't happen in my world. Now, I'm sure it happens in other products that are out there, but it doesn't happen in the complicated products that I tend to sell and that we sell at Agile Stacks. The real thing is we have to think ahead longer, and the customer may actually be trying to figure out how to solve a problem before they're ever willing to talk to a salesperson. And in reality, we see this in a wide variety of industries right now, where, you know, the metric is, and depending on which study you believe and who you're going to talk to, 50% of the sales done before the salesperson is contacted, or 70% or 60%, or whatever the metric is that you want to believe. Every analyst seems to have a different number there. But I think we all agree that when I was a young man, and I'm not anymore, the sales cycle was when I showed up at the door, and I started the sales cycle, right? Because you couldn't get information from the internet. Now the reality is most things have already been figured out and decided upon before any salesperson gets involved. And if you're a hunter, you may be so late that all you're doing is reacting to what is going on as opposed to positioning yourself to be ahead of the process. So that proactivity is a big word.
Gotcha. And so in this model, the trapper, are they they're more of an account executive, like an AE closing, like full-time closing role? Is that what you're?
Yeah. So my salespeople that I try to get to be trappers they're salespeople, right? They're account executives that they have a territory, they have a bunch of accounts that they're going after. And on the accounts that matter to them, I'm asking them questions on how are you positioning yourself so that when they actually make the order, or when they actually start the process, we're going to be in a driving position in getting the deal, as opposed to being driven. Hunters, and I'm probably compartmentalizing it a little bit too much. Hunters, a lot of times, are the people that, and we've all heard this problem where I got an RFP, an RFI, an RFQ, whatever your RFX happens to be, right? And you're not, you didn't have anything to do with affecting how that was written. And just about everybody will tell you, well, then don't respond to it, right? And there's various philosophies on that, right? But my philosophy is you probably shouldn't respond to that. You're probably column fodder. That was a very popular term in another book that was written 25 years ago. But the ability to influence that RFI as opposed to react to the RFI is a big deal. And hunters tend to react to the RFI. Trappers tend to influence the RFI. And so, gatherers tend to just wipe the RFI out. They take it off the market.
Gotcha. It seems like a gatherer is in the best position here if they don't even have to go through the RFI.
Yeah, gatherer is a great position to get in. But remember, there's two criteria for a gatherer. You have to work for a fantastic company. I mean, you have to work for a company that people buy without even knowing why they're buying from that company, right? So there's not a lot of companies out there that are in that space that have that much influence in their marketplace. So you have to work for that kind of company. You have to work for a company that literally you can live at that account. Maybe you have 5 accounts, 6 accounts, but that they're getting that much revenue out of that account.
Yeah, I'm feeling like these are the big, like the SAPs, the Oracles.
Exactly.
I hesitate to say Salesforce because I know they have some competition, but I know people that are reps over at Salesforce, and the sales culture there is crazy. They work super hard. So it's not like anybody's sitting back and relaxing and throwing their feet up.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is that I say that there's really is no bad thing about farmers, gatherers, trappers, or hunters if you're going to work your ass off, right? Because if you work your ass off, you probably are doing enough of the good things of those other quadrants on this chart that you actually can be successful and get your deals. I know farmers that make their number all the time. I know hunters that make their number all the time. I know gatherers that make their number all the time, and I know trappers that make their number all the time, right? So you can be one of them, you are primarily one of them, but if you work your ass off, you can probably be successful too.
Gotcha. And so I'm curious how you see this. So one of the things that our company stands behind is the idea of specialization of sales roles. And so sort of separating the sales roles, pulling out the handling of inbound and outbound appointment setting, having dedicated account execs, having dedicated account manager, customer success people. How does that fit into this model here?
So this is primarily for the account execs, the people that are actually selling, the closing the deal, right?
Gotcha.
For SDRs or BDRs, the inside salesperson that's trying to get appointments, and I love that model as well. That model actually can relate to this a little bit, but typically they're going to be hunters or they're going to be trappers. I mean, let's be perfectly honest, right? They're not just farming the account. They're not, because that's just not what that role does, right? So
unlikely in that model. I got you.
Yeah, it's just unlikely, right? In that role that they can't do that. However, if you're just a person who picks up the phone and makes a phone call to a name that you got off of some lead list, especially if it was a cold lead list, like you went to Discover.org and you found a name, good luck to you. Have fun with that, right? So that's extreme hunter, right? You're not going to have a lot of success doing that. However, if you took that name then and you really kind of analyze, okay, this title makes sense and this is what this title does, and I have some ideas on what I have to say to that title. This company was in this industry and these things are affecting this industry right now. This title at that industry is affected this way. Now you're starting to think a little bit more like a trapper. Now you're starting to think of planning ahead. And maybe you've done some research on the company. You know, they bought other things like this. They bought other competitors' products, or maybe they bought complementary products. And you figure that out as well. So you got a little bit more research. You got ahead of it a little bit. Once again, you were proactive at talking to the customer, or before you even talk to the customer, you're proactive about understanding what the problems are, what the needs and goals of that company are. You know, maybe you just open up the annual report and read the annual report, which, you know, I really wish more salespeople would do.
Mm-hmm. And so let's get into, so if I understand you, this quadrant really applies to people specifically focused in that account executive role, and really thinking about, like, if we're thinking through the lens of specialized sales roles, we're probably looking at, you know, the hunter trapper as being the light and the shadow archetype within here. And so help me understand, what does a good trapper do, right? Like, I think I get the model here, but like, what are some of the things that we can learn from these good trappers?
Sure. I'm going to show you a different graph, if you don't mind, that I think might be helpful. I'm not going to go right in order here, so I'm going to jump around. Yeah. So I talk about this. I talk about decision timelines a lot, right? So typically, not typically, always in a complicated sell like what I do, you'll have this decision-making timeline. And I don't call it a buying timeline, it's a decision-making timeline, right? Because that's all really sales is convincing somebody to make the decision that we want in the time frame that we want them to make it. So where are you going to engage with the customer in this decision-making timeline, right? So there's a cost of sales issue with this, right? So we have this issue of the later I engage with the customer, I'm spending less money, right? As a chief revenue officer that's trying to figure out how to keep my costs under control, that's a big deal for me. I like that. I'd love for you to say, yeah, you stole that deal and you closed in 3 weeks. That's fantastic, right? That doesn't mean your sales timeline or the customer's buying timeline was 3 weeks. The sales timeline started with, you know, like somebody at the customer saying, hey, we're missing a goal. We're not achieving what we need to achieve. And then there's a variety of processes the customer has to go through, or the prospect has to go through, in order to get to the point where they're actually issuing a purchase order. That is just fact of life in a complicated sales organization, a complicated sales process. So where do you want to enter into that process? So a trapper wants to enter in as early as possible by still trying as much as possible to control his or her cost of sales, right? So you still have to call on 15 accounts or 30 accounts or 50 accounts, whatever's in your territory. So you have to be able to do that efficiently. So things that a trapper has to do is, how do I communicate to customers constantly so that I am helping them in that process, that I'm actually driving them to make a decision? Maybe even in that first arrow there is intentional. It is actually prior to them saying we are missing a goal, right? Because part of being in sales is to actually convince the customer you have a problem and you're living with your problem. You just don't even realize it yet, right? And that's just part of being a good salesperson, right? So a trapper wants to be as early in this process as possible, but they have to put together tools and techniques that they don't waste a lot of time, because this could be really, really long. And the longer it is, the longer your cost of sales is, right? The fewer companies you can call on because you're spending all this time with a customer that's taking a long time to buy. So there's lots of ways to do that, right? So constant letters, constant newsletters, creating a newsletter that you are sending from a salesperson, not the marketing department, from the salesperson, sending a newsletter once a month. I mean, that's just really easy to do. It's easy to leverage that. You can leverage stuff from your marketing department per se, and you're just giving them information. And that doesn't even have to be information about my company. It could be information about my industry, about things that are happening in my environment, things that are happening in my community, whatever that community happens to be, if that's your city, your industry you're calling on, or whatever. So all of those things add to that. I can now keep track of that customer and keep my name and my company and my brand in front of that customer for as long as possible without spending a lot of effort. And that's just stuff that a trapper has to do in order to be effective at doing this job. This is hard, but it takes proactive thought and proactive planning in order to pull that off.
Gotcha. And so what you're saying is, what I'm hearing is you're effectively, like, I think one area to differentiate between the two is really at what stage do you jump in and start doing the work?
Exactly.
Because if we look all the way at the end of the spectrum, or the far right of the spectrum here, it's place order. So if you exist there, you're an order taker. Right? If somebody phones you and says, "I want 6 units of this," you're effectively an order taker. Yeah, exactly. I've been in that role, and there's nothing wrong with that role. It's just your influence over the deal is very minimal because they've already decided. Yeah. Right. Okay, I want X. I want 6 of X. Give me that, please.
Yeah, and then in those kind of situations, you also start to question as a management team. You start to question, do you really even have to have Salesforce, right? Can you just automate all this and say, if we're just taking an order, then why in the world are we paying the salesperson to do any work, right? So the closer you are to giving the order, the less value that the salesperson really has, right? So because they're not influencing the deal. And these arrows are obviously, randomly spaced, evenly spaced across the sales. So it's wherever it makes sense in your organization to do it. But with the understanding that the customer is going to go through a variety of effort along the process, and every customer is going to be different depending on what you're selling. Some of those steps that I have up here might take a day, and they might take 6 months, right? But the reality is that they all start with the customer realizing that they're missing a goal. They're not achieving what they want to achieve. Some people call that pain, but I actually say you really want to get back to you're missing a goal, not that you have pain. But then it's, do we even care, right? And this is the pain problem, right? Because just because you're not achieving what you want to achieve, that doesn't always mean anything in today's environment. And I'm just not talking today's environment because of the current health scare, but in general, there are competing issues that cause you to care about, I want to spend money, or I as a company am going to spend money to solve that problem. Some problems we're just going to put up with. We're just going to live with the problem because it's not worth fixing it, because we have other things that we have to do.
This is really interesting. It made me think of something that one of my colleagues, Kenny, talks a lot about, which is just sort of being relevant. And I'm going to go on a tangent here. So follow if you can. And I apologize for thinking out loud because it just sort of triggered something in my mind. But if we're thinking about sort of like account qualification, right? This is, are we missing a goal? That's coming up on like there's some friction in their life. I think even before here, if I apply Kenny's model, it starts with the responsibility of like, what are you responsible for? And does that sort of align with what our company does? And the next step down is the goal, is the KPI. Like, do you have a KPI or goal for this year or this quarter that sort of aligns with something that, one of our products could solve or services could solve? And then it's sort of like job to be done, right? So if, we're coming in here at like, are we on track to hit that KPI or not? And if there is, great. All right. So like, are we, is there a job to be done that we can solve? Fantastic. Is there any friction for them? Is there enough friction for them to do something externally? Yes or no? And really what you're saying is you're looking, when you're coming in, you're getting your team to go in and look for these opportunities where it's the right individual at the right company. They exist in a situation where they have a goal, but there's this disparity between their goal and what their capabilities are, and you're looking to get in before they realize there's a gap.
Yes. So, the primary book of all books for sales training for sales is the Strategic Selling, was written back in like 1984, right? So it's an old book. It's older than me in sales, and it was my very first book that I actually read back when I was a kid.
Hey, mine too.
In sales, yeah. So it's a great book. One of the things that they taught in that book, and I don't remember what page, I could look it up because the book's right behind me in this cabinet. But one of the things that they taught in that is, where do you want to be versus where are you, right? What is that gap, right? If that gap is small, if there's very little gap between what your goal of what you want to be like and the goal of and the reality of where you are, if there's not much gap there, you don't have a deal. If there's a big gap there, then you got a deal, right? I mean, that's essentially what that part was saying.
100%. And I love Miller Hyman. It was certainly the first book I read. I think the new Strategic Selling was still only updated 20 years ago. So I've read both versions. They're very similar, but you're right. I want to say one of the phrases that stuck with me that like help me understand was it was along the lines of you're looking for a delta between reality and expectations.
Exactly right. Exactly.
And if you
right.
could find that, you've got a deal.
If you find that, you've got a deal. And that's kind of what that very first statement is on this timeline is we are missing a goal, right? So somebody in the organization realizes that there is a gap, and it always starts with one person, right? And we may not find that one person. It's kind of like patient X and or patient zero in the healthcare that we're going through right now. We may never find that person, but some person realizes that we are missing this goal, right? And then it goes from there. So then it's this do you agree step that the company has to go through, especially for complicated, expensive products like what I tend to sell. That do you agree step takes a lot of work because it has to get enough people to agree that, yeah, we are missing our goal, right? It's not just one person who's going to say that. And then it's do you care? And then do you really care? And that's really going after, did I get more money? Did I get enough money to solve the problem? So yes, somebody cares, but does the executives, is it in the budget, all that kind of stuff, that do we really care about solving that problem? And then it goes into, and this is where most people enter the sales process of how do we fix it, right? And that's really when salespeople get excited, right? How do we fix it? Come up with ideas on how we're going to fix it, and then evaluate those ideas. That's where salespeople like to think they are, but customers started a long time before that. And if you can be an influencer in that process, then you can really start to control the ideas and the formal evaluation of ideas. And that's really what a trapper is being all about, right? So everybody else is good. All the other three personas is very good. But a trapper is saying, how do I get so early in the process that I can now completely control how do we fix it, the ideas, and the formal evaluation of the ideas. If I can control that, I can control that last step, which is who gets the order.
Yeah, there have been so many opportunities that I've worked that have just been, you submit the bid and it's essentially recycling.
Yeah.
Like you said, would you call it column fodder?
Column fodder. Yeah. So that I'll make a call out to that book as well. And that was not strategic selling, solution selling. Made a big thing about Bosworth. Can't remember his first name. Bosworth made a big thing about this whole idea of being column fodder, right? If you're not driving that decision, then you're just not relevant, right? And so, I took my first solution selling course probably 20 years ago, and at one time I was actually certified in coaching solution selling. But I was like, okay, well, how do we get salespeople to actually drive that decision to not be column fodder, right? And that's where I saw that gap of we got to move earlier in the process. But by going earlier, now my cost of sales go up, right? So, I'm a VP of sales. I worry about that. Every salesperson is their own VP of sales as well, because they have to be self-motivated. So that how do I take care of that without digging myself into a hole that I really can't even keep up with my accounts? And I have to go to my boss and say, I have too many accounts, but I'm still not making my quota, right? So you don't want that conversation ever to happen. Right
on. Yeah, for sure. And it was Michael T. Bosworth.
Yeah, Michael Bosworth, that's right.
Yeah. I had to look it up, but I thought it might have been Mike, but I was pretty sure I was making that up. So lucky guess.
Yeah.
So I want to get to talking to the story of those bottles behind you and asking how you reward yourself after closing a big deal. But we had a conversation in our pre-interview. You had some interesting perspective on what a great salesperson does. Your sort of three legs.
Yeah. So let me go to a different slide. And
if you're listening along, we will. I'll include a link to the graphics that Sean's sharing here in the show notes. So definitely hit those up there if you're curious. So
I talk about this. Every salesperson sells three things, and I think this is really important. And it's a good way to think about it. And that is, you sell your product, you sell your company, and you sell yourself. The bad thing is only one of those matters. And that is yourself. So you got to be a really good salesperson. In my world, you have to be a really good salesperson. But let me just kind of walk through this again. So you sell your product. You have to know your product. You have to know all the features about and the benefits about your product. You have to be able to position that product in front of a customer. That's a given, right? your company, you have to talk about how that company has good services. They're going to stand behind the product. They have good R&D, whatever the case may be, right? So that's the company information, right? You're going to be around tomorrow. That's the other company information, right? Unfortunately, those two things are almost always ties in most sales contests, right? So, or most sales campaigns. So your product, now you might be lucky. You might have a product that is fantastic, right? That there is no other product on the planet that is as good as this product today. And it just sells itself, right? And that's great. If you have that product and those happen, there was a point in my career that for about 1.5 years that I worked for a company that had that product. And literally we were just selling it like it was nobody's business. And that was a fantastic sales time. I blew away my number when I sold that product back when I was the direct salesperson. But it doesn't happen typically. Typically, most products are plus or minus the same as all the other products in their space, right? So there's 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 products that are almost as good as the product that you sell. Now, every salesperson just said, but my product's better, right? Every person listening to your podcast right now just said, my product's better. Okay, your product's better in this area and that area, but it's probably worse in the 2 areas and over somebody else, right? So essentially, it comes out to a tie. And you have to almost assume that it's going to be a tie. Same thing with company. Now, chances are most people work for really good companies. They're reputable companies. They're trying to do the best by their customers. They're trying to help their customers as much as they possibly can. Sure, some companies may have a bigger bank account, so they're more stable or whatever. But for the most part, company becomes a tie as well. But like I said before, you work for a fantastic company and you're a gatherer. You're talking about your company all the time because that's a long-term thing. And we mentioned a couple of companies, SAP and Oracle, that kind of fit into that. So they are unique companies in their space. And some people say, well, I don't like SAP and I don't like Oracle too, right? So maybe the company isn't a plus. But for the most part, companies or customers don't buy because of the company. They may buy because of the product, but they rarely buy because of the company. And if they do, that's a customer that's going to be hard to steal away. So if those are ties, the most important thing that you're selling is yourself, is your ability to work with your prospects and actually grow your deal and be valuable to them. I looked for a guy a long, long time ago that said, and once again, this is in the IT space, so selling IT products, the customers we call on, the prospects we call on before they are customers, the only thing we can do to help them before they're a customer is to make them smarter. The only thing that matters to them is to make them smarter. Because if I make them smarter, they might get promoted, they might have more influence in their peer group, which is good because then maybe they'll buy my product, right? So the only thing I can do is to make them smarter. So in my world, I have to make everybody around me smarter. I have to convince people that they should read this article. That's why sometimes I'll send out, or my salespeople send out articles and videos that aren't even made by my company. They're made by somebody else. It's a really cool idea. It's a really good technique. It's a really good success story. Gee, Mr. Customer, I just thought you'd like to see this. I'm not trying to sell them at that point. All I'm trying to do is sell myself because I am trying to make them smarter and I'm going to do stuff for them. When we think about that decision-making timeline, when you're really, really early, that's what you're doing primarily. You're selling yourself because you're not ready to sell your company. You're not ready to sell your product. So if we think about all those things, I will win an order. And I've had customers actually say this, that your product was not the best product on the market for doing what we wanted to do. Your company, yeah, okay, they tied, but your product was not the best. But we're going to buy from you because we're confident that you're going to make us successful. And that's a great way to win a deal because then you can overcome a lot of deficiencies in your product and deficiencies in your company if you are a fantastic salesperson and you're really trying to put the other person first. Zig Ziglar, who is the king of sales, right? He had a variety of sayings, obviously, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of them. One of them was stop selling and start helping, or start helping and stop selling, or I can remember how he put it, right? So it was essentially, if I help you and I keep helping you and I keep making you better, then over the long term, you're probably going to give me an order. And I'm going to be in a position where I'm going to influence that sale and I'm going to influence those ideas and how you evaluate those ideas so that you can get the deal. So I think it's really important for salespeople to understand that yourself is the most important thing that you sell, and you need to kind of put that front and forward in the sales process.
100%. I can remember numerous sales, especially when I was doing in the diesel generator space, and whether it was selling or renting. I had a number of customers that called me because they called me all the time because they didn't know how to size up or spec out a gen,
Sure.
and they didn't want to learn how to do the math, which is fair enough. It wasn't.
Yeah.
It was straightforward, but it took an investment of time. And to figure out how to answer all the right questions. And they could call me, and in 2 minutes I would do that, whether it was mine or not. And all of a sudden I had probably a group of like 15 to 20 guys that called me every week that said, "Hey, I'm doing this. There's no project here yet, but when thanks for helping me. And when you do figure it out, like, we'll give you a call." And that's where, once I had built that network of those 15 to 20 people, it was a total game changer. All of a sudden, it wasn't a competition about like, oh, price. It was, oh, it's just Collin. Just,
right.
Oh, you got a new guy, you're renting a Jenny, you buying a Jenny. Okay, phone Collin.
Yeah. Just call Tom. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I'm not sure when this podcast will come out, probably a couple of weeks from the time we're recording it, but it's going to be an uncertain time, right? We are now re-entering very uncertain times, and people are going to struggle, right? A great salesperson can call up the 15 people that he has that great relationship with, and not all 15 are going to be in a position to return a favor. But those 15 people, there's going to be 5 or 4 or 3 that will say, "Yeah, I'm going to do something, and you're right, and I'll accelerate it just for you. I'm going to take care of you in this time of troubling times, and you're going to get that deal. You'll get that next deal just because I got to get that done, and I'm going to take care of you." That is when the great salespeople really rise to the top.
Speaking of deals, Sean, talk to me about your unique way of celebrating when you close a big deal.
Yeah, so I'm a big believer in rewards, right? And goals, right? So I love to say, when I do this, I need to have a reward. When a salesperson does this for me, I need to have the reward. And everybody's different. Everybody has a different way to do it. So some people will say, or actually, I'll suggest to some people that you should reward yourself when you close a deal that is 5% of your quota, or your annual quota, right? Whatever that means, right? Especially if you get lots of deals. But maybe your deals are bigger and every deal is 10%. You only close 10 deals a year to make your quota. Every deal is 10% or 15%. So, you got to adjust that number. But at a certain point, you have to say, I need a reward because I just did good. And paychecks are great, but rewards are important. And you can't really trust your boss. I'm a big believer in don't count on your boss. Don't count on marketing to get your job done. You personally have to be responsible for your own success. So one of my things is when I close a deal that's 5%, I get this. That's those bottles that you talked about, right? So I love tequila. I'm a big tequila drinker. And this tequila is called Clase Azul. I'm not trying to sell it, but if you like tequila, it's a great tequila to try. It's a sipping tequila. Each bottle is hand painted. It's not a glass bottle. It's a porcelain bottle. Each bottle is hand painted. There are some ridges that they paint in there, but if you look at the bottom, all of these little decorations are all different all the way across. All the decorations here are different. If I show you another bottle of the same kind, you'll see that they're slightly different. There are variations in that. So each one's hand painted, even though the bottle is exactly the same. So this bottle is not cheap. This is 750 milliliters, 3/4 of a liter bottle of tequila. It's not a cheap. So I have seen this. I've been to a restaurant in New York City. I asked them, "Gee, I see you have Clase Azul on the shelf. How much is a shot of that on the rocks?" And they said $75. So it's not a cheap drink, right? So it's not a drink that you're going to drink every day. It's not going to be your daily. If it is your daily, then you're really blowing it out of the water, and congratulations to you. But it's my treat. It's the thing that I do as a treat. So when I close a deal that's 5%, I do this. I buy this, right? And I know other people, they'll do other things. Like maybe they'll say, when I close a deal that's 5% or 10% of my quota, I'm going to take my wife, my spouse, out to dinner at this one restaurant, and we never go to that restaurant unless we close that deal, right? So you got to save these things as being special. I will never go to that restaurant. I will never buy this bottle. People give them to me because I do have people give me as gifts, but I'll never buy it myself until I get a 5% of my quota deal closed. It's just the way it is. It's how it's going to always be. Now, I did have to change that when I became a VP of sales, because now it's not, I don't close deals myself, so I have other ways of rewarding myself. But that was definitely how I did it when I was a direct salesperson. It was literally 5% deals, 4% deal. No, I don't get it, right? I got to get a 5% deal. I got to get a 6% deal, whatever that was, right? And the same thing with, taking out for dinner with your spouse, or I'm going to buy a new suit or whatever. You don't do that unless you close that deal, unless you made that happen. So I'm a firm believer in set that goal for yourself, reward yourself, be happy about it. It's not your annual quota. You'll go to club or whatever. That's all good. That's counting on your company to give that to you. You need to personally reward yourself that you are successful. It's kind of like there's some programs for losing weight that when you lose that first 5 pounds or the first 10 pounds, go eat a pizza, right? So it's the same kind of basic thing. It's like reward yourself for hard work, be successful, save the bottle, put it up on your shelf, and remind yourself of all those successes. That shelf up there about the bottles that I've won that are 5% deals, and I've actually got another whole closet full of these, so that's not just all of them, is much more important to me than the other plastic awards that I have that are sitting over on this side, or the plaques that get to my walls, the plaques that are on my walls.
Yeah, you can't drink a plaque. I definitely like the idea of the booze. Sean, I really appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you so much. One last thing that we always like to do is give you a chance to promote yourself. So we're going to move to the Cold Call Me section here. Set it up for me. Who am I, and what are you calling about?
Sure. So my company is Agile Stacks, and we sell to customers that have Kubernetes. And some of your listeners may not know what Kubernetes is, and that's perfectly fine.
It's an STD, right?
Kubernetes is no, it's not. it's a tool that originally came out of Google for making applications run better in the cloud.
Gotcha. Okay? So like a containerization kind of.
Yeah, exactly. It actually manages containers, right? So my perfect customer, so I'm going to set you up for my perfect customer, make this easy on myself, right? My perfect customer is somebody who has tried Kubernetes. They've done 1 or 2 implementations, but now they can't seem to figure out how to do the 5th one or the 3rd one, right? So that's it's a vice president of development or application development that they've done it a little bit, but now they have to figure out how to do it for 10 groups as opposed to that first 1 or 2 groups, right? So that's my perfect customer to set myself up.
Perfect. All right. I'll do my best to throw up some relevant objections, but this is, I'm reaching here. So
That's fair. I appreciate
it. Here we go. Ring, ring. Hey, this is Collin.
Hey, Collin. How you doing?
Good. How you doing?
Very, very good. So I got your name. You're the vice president of application development at your company, and I hope you got a few minutes to talk to me right now. Is that okay?
I'm just about to head into a meeting.
Perfect. So I won't take much of your time. So I understand from just reading about your website and reading a couple of presentations that you've done a couple of implementations of Kubernetes. Do I have that right, or did I miss out on that?
Yep.
Okay. How's that going? Did you do your first 1 or 2? Did those work out pretty well for you?
Yeah, team's really happy. They've got 2 or 3 going right now.
Good. How you doing on your 5th one or your 10th one? Your 10th team to go live on it?
No idea. It's a mess.
No idea. Yeah. Okay. So I talked to a lot of vice presidents of application development, and what I hear over and over again is the first 1 or 2 worked really well because we put a lot of resources on it. We put our best and smartest people on it. We created a tiger team to do that first one, and now we're doing our 5th one, and we're just hit the brick wall. Anything like that sound familiar?
Totally.
Okay. So my company is Agile Stacks, and what we do is we help you manage all of the difficulties around Kubernetes. This Kubernetes requires many, many applications around it to actually work. And that's usually the challenge of getting Kubernetes to be successful. And that's usually why that 3rd team or that 4th team or that 10th team that's going to go live on Kubernetes is really starting to struggle. What I'd like to do is I'd like to show you how do we manage that Kubernetes ecosystem and make it easier for your team to do it, make it easier to reproduce all the good content that you learned on your first or your second iteration, and really make your processes go faster. You have 45 minutes for me to do a demo. We don't have to do it now. I know you're going to a meeting right now, but I'd love to set up a time to have a demo with you.
Sounds great.
Okay. You are the easiest customer I've talked to in weeks.
I know. I was trying to think of objections, and I'm like, I know Docker a little bit, but this is, I think it's different. Docker is the container, and Kubernetes is like organizing containers. Anyway, Sean, thank you so much for coming on the show. This was super awesome. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
The best way to do it, I should have put a slide on this, I apologize, but the best way to get a hold of me is Sean, SEAN, at AgileStacks.com. And I'll put, when I actually give you my slides, I'll actually put it on the slides as well.
Beautiful.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Collin. Look forward to talking to you again.
For sure. And we'll see you all next week.